Welcome back to the CHE. I'm Jazz Class. When we left off in the thrilling trilogy of the Dr. Psych interview, Sparkspur and the Doctor himself were discussing extra data discovered through the surveys. Put on your fezzes and bow ties and tune in now for the thrilling continuation of the Dr. Psych interview with Sparkspur.
Ask the bronies to commit a chunk of time, and however, because we did that, what happens is sometimes later, you say, oh, we should have thought about blank. This has happened quite often. We should have thought about when they joined the fandom, and it's like, we've got that, so we've got, because I was pretty exhaustive in creating the surveys. And included, in some cases, like, for example, the curiosity and the life, meaning of life scales, which are both only like 10 items. And we included them because I had this intuition, and I saw a little bit in, nobody was doing fandoms, but a few of the other studies, and we have found some very striking results. And so once you have it, you can always come back and say, "Ooh, we can answer that question." Whereas if you only collected 5 or 6 questions, usually then you have to keep running out and doing yet another survey. And yet, because we've done big surveys, we haven't had to ask the fandom to pony up as often. And and again, I simply cannot express our gratitude to the bronies who have sat and gone through that, and we're still getting people coming and taking the longitudinal survey, which is a long survey, and that's the one we're using to follow a group of bronies. Well, we want to follow them for 3 to 4 years, so we can really talk about the issue of, how does it change? Who drops out, who stays. Simply, how do people change as they're in the fandom? And that's a question we get a lot of times, and you can't really answer it until we have that data collected.
Have you thought about following the groups in person? I know that sounds kind of creepy, like you're studying wildlife, but I mean, that might be something.
What do you mean, follow the groups in person?
Well, there are social groups that meet up and do things like that. Have you thought about...
Oh, you mean like trying to tap in... No, that's a good... that's a good point. That's an interesting... I
mean, not every group's the same. A lot are different. Like
right.
Charleston meets every week,
mm-hmm.
and Charlotte meets once every other month, and our group here in Greenville meets about every 3 weeks, it seems.
Yeah. Actually, that's a very interesting question. Especially if you could maybe do is you could, and here we're generating sort of research ideas, which is...
Well, you were talking about studies of fandom, and the only one I
Right.
can think of is the Otaku study from the mid-'90s, which basically just ended up being a documentary that no one watched.
Oh, a bummer. But see, one thing, and in fact, might be an interesting idea would be, for example, I know, your meetup group, is if you could recruit sort of meetup groups and get everybody who's in that group to go do, and keep it kind of fairly brief, but have a brief survey. Everybody in that group does it, and they kind of and they have an identification. So we would, and then what would be intriguing to me would be to have perhaps the admin of the group, basically over the course of a year or two, simply keep a roll of who comes regularly and who doesn't, who sort of disappears, and that. Because, see, you could then use that, and if you put together enough of these groups, suddenly you would have, and you could look and see, is there a group, as I'm sure there's a group who's almost always there, and then there are those people who you sort of like almost forget about, and they every so often will reappear.
Right.
And, and that's the kind that would be a very useful way of looking at kind of the consistency.
That sounds like fun, actually, to me.
Yeah.
I do that anyway.
Yeah. Well, and that's a very good point. And actually I have a meeting Friday, the Brony study, the three of us that are here, it's part of our, Daniel Chadbourne is our Louisiana faculty member, and so we do not, although we'll be going down there, we're presenting at the Popular
DerpyCon
Culture.
South? No? Oh.
Well, he's speaking at DerpyCon South, but we're presenting 3 papers on the Bronies at the Popular Culture Association meeting in October in New Orleans, so we'll be down there. But I'll talk to the group because that it would be a little
It wouldn't.
there'd be a little, it'd take a little work to orchestrate it. It's a lot harder. It's easier if you just sort of say, hey, come one-shot thing, no identification, just do it. This would involve kind of, there'd be some people who'd say, well, wait a minute, I don't want somebody following me like that and that. But there might be ways in which you can do it in which it wouldn't be very intrusive. And if you were able to do that and say you got 10, 12 meetup groups or more, and you could follow them for a year or two, you could look at who are the people who kind of consistently show who they're. I would find it intriguing to look at the type. Oh, that's probably, if we've got another minute or two, how are we doing time?
We're good. If I get too long, I can always split it in half and have 2 interviews.
Well, we're kind of free associating in our.
I'm not worried at all.
This is good. I enjoy that because sometimes when I'm talking about one thing, another, and actually I was just ready to say, I would find it very intriguing to look at the typology and how it's tied to people's attendance at meetings. And that's probably one of the things that we also often get questions from the Bronies about is
what's typology?
Our typology. Sorry. Typology is it's when you try to put people into groups based upon defining characteristics.
Oh, okay.
So, like, for example, introverted, extroverted is a typology. And in fact, the Bronies have shown, as often happens with most social groups, a natural tendency to create typologies. If you saw the program that John Delancey was involved with, the first documentary, he talked about, there are different types of Bronies, and he said there are the creative Bronies, and then there are the hipsters, and people naturally want to do that. What we did, though, is that we created our typology based upon our data. And there were, when after our first survey, when we had lots of, I went in and did some factor analysis, and these are ways in which you take lots of data and meld it down. You take 160 pieces of data and you end up with like 20 scores, and then you do it further and you end up with few. And we eventually got down to 2 scores, which means kind of 2 general factors that the Bronies seem to vary on. And those were what we eventually called the guidance factor. The question of to what degree do you find guidance, direction, answers within the show and or the fandom. Because I actually think it's as much the fandom as it is the show. Although the WWPD, What Would a Pony Do, makes it sound like you're really looking at the show, but a lot of people, it's more of what would the fans do? What do we do when we're faced with this situation? But the other thing was disclosure, which makes perfect sense. Can you tell people you're a Brony? And if you take those, so on the one side you've got guidance, high, medium, and low. On the other side you have disclosure, high, meaning like you're wearing a shirt, you're walking around, people know you're involved with the fandom, to very low, those people who, in fact, they make sure that nobody will even find a folder called ponies on their computer. And when you do that, you can create. First, we created a 2x2, but eventually we realized there's actually 5. There's the people who are high in guidance and high in disclosure, and we call those our social Bronies. You're probably one. My son Will is one. a lot of the people who go to the cons and the meetups probably, like when we met the other day over at the there. I mean, there were a bunch of us standing around in the middle of a public place
Right.
wearing pony shirts. So,
You missed a really good one where we there were so many of us they gave us the party room.
oh, cool. Well, I mean, and I'm so glad to see these kind of connections, because that's part of what's
Yeah.
very special about this fandom.
The other mall kicked us out when we got that big.
Yeah, well, again, it probably comes down to the people running the mall, how
Well,
kind of
still.
open-minded they are, and that. But so you have the high guidance, high disclosure. Those are the social bronies, which make up about 30% of the fandom, and then you have the high guidance. However, they are low disclosure, and some of these are the ones who I had one that I worked a lot with. He helped a lot early on, who was in ROTC, who said, my father would never understand, my mother wouldn't shut up about it. And so he basically was secret. And that's what we call the secret bronies, the ones who, and they make up about 25% of the fandom. And then the high guy, or
Got 45% left.
yeah, then you have the low guidance, but high disclosure, and they are what we call the hipster bronies. They're the ones, and sometimes they're almost brony trolls. They're the ones who will go in and start an argument about favorite pony just because they like to stir people up. They'll, they make up about 15% of the fandom. They are also the one group that is made up somewhat of the older bronies, kind of more from season 1.
4chan, Tumblr.
Yeah, and they're also the ones that seem to be more likely to be leaving. And then the smallest group is the low guidance, low disclosure, and they're what we call the hidden bronies, and they make up about 5%. And they, for a long time, have been a bit of a puzzle. It's almost like, what are they doing here? I mean, if you don't get guidance, but you also can't tell anyone. But they do seem to, they like the show. And also, I think these tend to be somewhat of the bronies that my one friend called them the sad bronies, who the fandom is a safe place, but they're still depressed and they're still really sad. And so it's sort of like they're with the group, but they're not able, unlike the social and the secret bronies, who are getting a lot out of the group, the hiddens aren't. And then the rest, which is perhaps about 25 to 30%, are the mixed, and they fall in the middle. In other words, and some of them are individuals who find some guidance in that. Some of them can tell their family, but they don't tell their friends. They're kind of, they're not fully hidden, but they're not in there. And interestingly enough, when you look at interest, the two groups where the interest is continuing to grow and get stronger are the guidance groups, the social and the secret. In other words, getting something out of the fandom seems. And I know sometimes what's difficult with the typology is it may be hard for people to see where they fit, because again, we've created this using 50,000 bronies, but the predictive power of it is striking. I mean, the social and hidden bronies are so different in every way possible, and the social and the secret have a lot of, even when you look at, interestingly, their families and how supportive their families are. The groups with the very supportive are, of course, the social bronies, and that the groups with the least supportive families are the secret and the hidden. So in other words, part of why they're secret and hidden is because it's simply not safe, and they know it's not safe. Whereas those who, and in fact, one of the things that we presented at the American Psych Association convention last week in D.C., which is the flagship, the pinnacle for psychology, and so the ponies were there. We found that the brony fandom, unlike science fiction fans, The bronies, while they look to the fandom for identity, and they look to it for, excitement and some escape and that, when it comes down to truly sort of intimate, close emotional ties, the bronies as a fandom find it at home with their friends. Whereas the science fiction fans, in some ways you might say they seem to fit the stereotype. And maybe they're fans because they can't have any friends otherwise, or they can't seem to find friends. Whereas, however, when you look at the bronies more closely, it's the social and the secret bronies who find the connections with the friends and family. So, it's the typology, and the way you test the typology is you see if it predicts differences. And it predicts differences in meaning of life, it predicts differences in just almost every measure. So I will stand by this typology, even though it's sometimes hard for an individual brony to kind of know what it means. But as a group, and it'll be interesting to see. I don't think we'll find any other fandom that has this same typology.
Unless it is, like you say, the other fandoms with their pony envy, as you think.
Right, but see, I don't know of many fandoms. I haven't come across many that have the pro-social aspect is such a core message.
The Whovian group is trying, and so is the steampunk group around here. But
yeah. But see, partly it's because of Lauren Faust, and she built it in. She built in the parable. She built in that message. And when she decided she didn't want parents and siblings to run out of the room screaming when they watched it, she made it in a way that was conducive for everybody to like it.
Well, that's what she's done with just about every show she's made. It's just this one's a bit different somehow.
And which is also part of understanding, people scratch their heads, and it's sort of like, well, this, which also when I get these people who complain and say the bronies, they're negative because they say the bronies have co-opted something that wasn't intended for them. It was for little girls, damn it, and the bronies took it up. Well, that's not true. If you listen to what Lauren Faust says, she did, she wanted to have a positive message for these young girls, but she also wanted to create something that everybody would like.
Well, there's stuff like that in everything, because, comic books were always meant for 10-year-old boys, and now DC sets out their thing that they only want 40-year-old men to read their books. It's what happens.
Yeah.
So you can direct that to Frank Miller, I guess, but whatever.
So the typology, I think, is probably of all of the brony study aspects, it's probably the one thing that people may have a little bit of a hard time grasping, but that's because they're looking at it as an individual. Where do I fit? And you have to realize this is nomothetic. It's kind of the bigger picture. It's the one thing that I think is going to probably ultimately get the bronies the most attention, because it's saying something about fandoms, and I like to hope in the end the brony study will not only have helped the bronies define themselves in that, but I hope, and I think it will, I think it may help all fandoms, because basically what we're saying is that all fans are not alike. I mean, people who like My Little Pony, they don't all like it for the same reason. People who like NASCAR don't all like it for the same reason. And yet it's funny, the assumptions that whole get a life, they just all need to get a life. Well, just like you said, for some of them, this is their life, and it's a very important part of their life. And, artists and, it serves so many other functions. And I've had so many parents come up and say how the fandom has saved their children. It allowed them to make friends. It allowed them to feel positive. It allowed them to walk away from the bullies. And that's a very powerful thing. And a lot of people don't recognize that. So I hope in the end our work will make social scientists look at all fandoms, in a different light. I may be a little grandiose, but I don't think so. I mean, now the biggest question I have is, now that we begin to branch out, how are we going to get other fans to give us the help that the bronies have? I mean, we're trying to do something with League of Legends fans, and I'll just say, so far our recruiting efforts have been dismal.
Yeah, League would be hard, because League can is actually a job now. So
right,
it's a bit different.
Which some fandoms become that, but.
Well,
But the key, I think it can be done. It's every fandom will be a bit different. Some are more defensive. Some are so scattered. Some. In fact, this is one of the things we sort of realize when we talk about fandoms. You can actually talk about what we call fanship, and that's like your fanship is your personal relationship to the show. You wear the cartoon, the shirt, Some people are real high in fanship. I mean, they are very involved. They play trivia. They watch the shows incessantly, have them all recorded. Some people aren't quite. I've met bronies who don't even watch the show, but they do everything they can with other bronies.
Yeah, I have got a few people like that.
That's the fandom. The fandom is your relationship to other fans, and I think what we're going to find, and I'm getting this sense, is like with League of Legends. Fanship is a very big thing. I mean, why people play and their favorite characters, and whether they buy skins. Will's educated me to that whole fandom, which I knew nothing about. But I'm not sure there's the same kind of fandom for that. I don't. The bronies have this fandom that is proving to be powerful and very, very pro-social. There will be other groups that I don't think they'll be very tied to the fanship, to their object of interest. But it'd be almost like somebody who reads cigar magazines and collects cigars, but he always smokes them by himself. Big on fanship, nothing on fandom. And yet there are other people who buy them, but they're buying them when they get together with the other connoisseurs. So it's the sharing and the and also probably they want to brag. Look at what I got. Oh, damn, man, where'd you get that? So it's more of the fandom.
And this is getting really psychological. You brought up cigars. It's always a bad sign.
Well, I bring up cigars sometimes because there's the whole idea that fandom, they need to get a life, and yet it's not all fandoms. If you're a cigar aficionado or a wine aficionado, or you collect luxury cars, people will say cool. But if you collect comic books or stamps or My Little Pony plushies, people are going to say you need to get a life. And I'm like, but what? I mean, the functions aren't that different. It's this stereotype about, well, there's some things it's appropriate. And that's where I like to kick those things around a little bit. I like to say, wait a minute, somebody collects plushies, they're not going to get cancer from it, whereas the cigar smoker could in the long run.
Well, I was just laughing at the cigar thing, avoiding the cigars on a cigar.
Yeah,
yeah. Well, that, I guess, covers a lot of the study aspects of this. I guess another question would be, you're following the herd. How closely are you? Do you like the music, the art, and stuff like that? Are you into that at all?
Somewhat. Although not as much as I probably could be. And this is a little bit of the scientist in me. That there's always this debate within science about, and in fact they even have a term for it, call them ACAFANs, ACAFAN. And it came up back when Star Trek really took off, is that you had some people who started studying Star Trek, but they were Trekkies. And they were professors who were Trekkies and there became the whole question about maintaining your objectivity.
Right. Can
you become so immersed in it that you lose sight of it? And so partly for that reason, I look at, and in fact I think I probably have liked and belong to the large majority of Facebook brony pages, because whenever I go onto my Facebook page, I warn people, if you see my page, be prepared for ponies. And I love the artwork, so a lot of times I'm also pulling down and kind of capturing some of the images and some of the music that people put up. But in honesty, I don't follow it real closely. In part because it's also very time-consuming doing the research. And we're meeting Friday to decide on a study a follow-up to what we call our exposure study, where we took 600 unsuspecting college students and exposed them to the Flim Flam episode. And then we looked at what they thought of the bronies before, what they thought after. We got some really good results that'll be presented at a conference probably next year. And we're going to follow that up, I think, with another study. But we have manuscripts. We have 3 that we've started that we have to get finished and get those under review. And so, I'm just busy. And I'm also writing my fan fiction trilogy, which the first book's done. The second one's about 60% finished. And that's, I'm very much enjoying that. So I'm on the fringe of I like to say I'm close enough to the fandom that as the herd goes by, I feel the rumble and I feel the breeze. Daniel is actually out there in the herd, and actually I think Jan's going to be too, because Jan was walking around BronyCon with pony ears on, so.
It's hard to avoid the pony ears. They're just fun. You don't have to have a reason.
No, I know. So, so I'm familiar with, but I'm not totally immersed. And some of it is simply just a time standpoint, and that. But
I understand. This takes up way too much of my time. I'm going to spend hours just getting this done, and I have class too.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah. Well, and we're all doing this. I spend the time with the research, and one thing I think at first too, and for quite a while, I think people wondered how serious we really were with this. Were we just asking people to do? Yeah, were we really going to do anything with this? Well, we will have by October 8 presentations this year at professional meetings, and including the APA, which is kind of the flagship, the pinnacle.
Right.
And we will be submitting manuscripts this next year to 3 of the more prestigious psychology journals. And I have a feeling we've got a pretty good chance of getting in. And so, we are moving on the data, and we are making sort of good use of it. And for me, even the fan fiction is actually, it's entertaining, but it's also a vehicle. I hope to educate people about the fandom, about the things people can get. I mean, you've got this group of isolated, lonely, bullied teenagers who become bronies, and you get to see some of the transformation that takes place with them. And they're dealing with some pretty serious alcoholic parents, sexual harassment, abuse. I mean, just some pretty heavy. So this is not going to be 10-year-old girl reading. This is more for the adult fans. But it's also, as a psychologist, it's a way for me to use the ponies to raise issues about good and evil, right and wrong, the choices we make, those kind of things.
Well, does it have a name? Can we find it? I mean...
Well, not yet.
Well, you said the first book was done.
Well, it's done. It's under review.
Oh.
I actually had to... well, it's a process, especially when you're doing a trilogy. I'm realizing you can't fully finish the first book until you have the second one.
Well, most people are used to just people releasing chapters as they come and stuff.
Well,
that's what I guess separates fan fiction from novels in a lot of senses.
Right. I didn't want to have to later in the second book say, "Oh, damn, I needed to have this." So I'm close. Although one of the things that happened is Zecora plays a very prominent role. However, I didn't have her line in the book, and one of the people who read the book really liked it. He said he's a brony. He said the only thing that was disconcerting to him was that Zecora didn't rhyme. And it's easier for me to dictate, because my writing is actually, in fact, on the way down here, I dictated a scene to the second book, and then I go back, I have a transcriptionist who types it up. She's in the Philippines. And I get it back, it's a word processor document, and then, so it's easier for me to just speak it and not worry about, but I had to go back over the last week and redo all of Zecora's dialogue to make it rhyme. And it actually ended up, even though it was a bit of work, because more words than you can imagine that don't really have rhymes, or they rhyme with something, but it wouldn't make any sense. But it also helped clarify some. I mean, it's sort of like it is her rhyming makes her messages reverberate and just that much more powerful. So that's why I've been a little. And then I'm also I'm drawing some maps, because the Equestria this takes place in is a little different from the map that Hasbro put out.
Or the older one that's literally just Ontario on its side. They had one during season 1, and they literally just took the map and turned it.
I didn't read. No, this was the one that you could pick it up at Walmart. They had several different ones.
There have been a few different ones.
Yeah. But I'm kind of redoing the map a little bit. I'm staying fairly true to the Rainbow Pony lands, where the main six and the Rainbow Ponies live. But because my book introduces some other ponies, and they live in another other part of the continent, so I'm kind of redoing. I'm having to create those maps.
Well, you can always do like what Burrow does without name dropping and just say what they look like.
Mm-hmm.
That's what a lot of people like about those stories, because Derpy's in all of them, but it's always just the yellow-maned Pegasus.
Yeah. Well, and I might do that, because I still haven't. They talk about, and it's interesting because they call them the Rainbow Ponies, and they talk about the Rainbow Ponies. They even allude a few times to like Ponyville and that. But so I'm probably maybe 2 to 3 weeks away from having the maps, and then book 1 will be finished, and then I'll be able to let some people start reading it. I'm still not sure exactly how it's going to come out, whether I'm going to try to get it published. I've got a connection with Hasbro, so I'm going to have to find out from them if there's going to be some issues. Or am I going to just have to release it online as sort of fan fiction?
Well, whatever you do, tell me, because this is not going to be released in a week, so I can probably link it or something for you if you'd like.
Yeah. Well, it'll probably be a little bit longer before I'm able. What I may be willing to do is let you read it, and you can give me some feedback, because
that would be interesting, to say the least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's well, I like, and the people who have read it. In fact, 2 of the people who just finished reading it are a little pissed at me now, but that's because, of course, the first book ended, and they're like, I want to know about the cutie mark, and I want to know about this. So I'm like, well, read the second book, which I'm busy finishing right now. So, and the third book I'm starting to outline. So, with any luck, if I can continue, of course, when school starts up, things. But I do all the dictating when I'm in the car. So as long as I do my gym every day, gym trip, I knock it out. I may by January have all 3 dictated. The editing takes a little while.
Well, yeah.
So it'll be, it's a lot of fun. And I like the characters. I mean, I told somebody, it's like, I'm really anxious to see how it ends. I mean, I know how it ends, but I don't know all the things the characters are going to do in between. So that's the joy of creativity.
Well, I guess there you have it, anyone watching this far into this really, really long video. Feel validated, Dr. Psychology, a trained doctor of psychology, still writes fan fiction, and there you go.
The interview is almost done, but it is not yet over. So many questions remain unanswered. What more can Dr. Psychology tell us about his fan fiction? What what is the future of his studies? Will the Sparkspur Doctor ship become canon? Find out in the thrilling conclusion of the Dr. Psych interview.